See part two. So in the previous part, right, we were learning about transitions, so movements between one location to another, or it could be making one choice or another choice. Yeah, that's what these represent. Now we're going to quickly recap on it. So let's fill this in. So actually, before we get into that, a transition matrix. Okay, the point of it. Okay, because it helps you make predictions about future states of a system. So they're basically there to help you make a prediction of where people might move to, what the new number might be, depending on what happened this week, okay, or on this particular day. So let's look at an example here. The following transition matrix T shows the proportion, so the number of customers who are predicted to shop at Aldi, Coles, or Woolies next week, given where they shopped in the current week. So remember when we read a matrix, this is going to be current, and on the side is going to be the next. Okay, so let's fill this in. So remember the rows, so the columns must always add up to 100%. So let's look at that first one. I can see there that the first one is 0.7, then it's 0.2, so that's already 0.9, which is 90%. So the remainder should be what, guys? 0.1, which is 10%. Okay. C column, let's look at that. So I've got 0.8 and 0.05, so that's already 0.85. What's the remainder? Jordan, what would the remainder be here? So if you're at 85%, what's remaining here? 0.15. Close. Okay, and last column, W column, you're at 0.3 and 0.5 gives you 0.8. Okay, so you've all got 20% remaining, so that should be 0.2. Okay, so that's that for now. Now, the way we read this, okay, or the way that we're supposed to understand this, is like it says here, this transition matrix shows where a customer is going to shop given where they shop today. So let's say, for example, I am Kira, okay? I've got to go to Aldi and buy some groceries, okay? So I go to Aldi this week, this current week. So that means next week from Aldi, she has a 70% chance of going back to Aldi again. Lovely. Okay, but let's say Kira, instead, all right, she makes another decision. You know what? Next week, if this week I shop at Aldi, next week she has a 20% chance at Coles because the sales weren't that good. Okay, so she's gonna go back to Coles the next week. Okay, and what the lower one here would say, the last number, if this week she shopped at Aldi, that means next week she has a 10% chance of shopping at Woolies. Okay, because the sales are maybe even better. And it's the same for all of them, right? Let's say I was at Coles this week. I have a 15% chance that I'm going to go to Aldi next week. If I shop at Coles this week, I have an 80% chance of going back to Coles next week. If I shopped at Coles this week, I have a 5% chance that I'll go to Woolies. Okay, that's how we read this. So it's from current to wherever the next is. So if I'm at Woolies, I have a 30% chance of going to Aldi next week. If I'm at Woolies, I have a 20% chance of going to Coles. And then if I'm at Woolies, I have a 50% chance of going back to Woolies the week after. Okay, so that's how we read this. Okay, current to the next. So we've done the first part. We filled in the entries in the transition. Part B, what percentage of customers who shop at Aldi this week are predicted to shop at Coles next week? So Aldi to Coles. Okay, what's the percentage of that? So if you're at Aldi this week, what's the percentage you go to Coles next week? 20%, all right? And Anthony is saying Aldi to Coles, which is that one. Okay, so 20%, easy. That's what you would write. Okay, question C. If 1,000 customers were to shop at Woolies this week, how many are going to be shopping at Aldi next week? So what this is saying is Woolies to Aldi. Okay, so what's the percentage of Woolies to Aldi for now? Anyone want to tell me? Woolies to Aldi? Yeah, 30. So Woolies to Aldi will be 30. 30%. So now we're not quite finished yet. What you need to do next. So if you have 1,000 people who shopped at Woolies this week, what percentage of them, or what's the number of them that will go to Aldi? So we need to find 30% of 1,000. Okay. So it's going to be 0.3 times 1,000, which is 300. Okay, so 300 people out of 1,000 are going to go to Aldi next week. So if they went to Coles this week, Woolies, they're going to go to Aldi the week after. Okay. Let me put it down here because there's not enough space. So let's do D. If 800 people shopped at Coles this week, how many of them are predicted to go Coles elsewhere next week? Okay, so if you were at Coles this week, what percentage will go elsewhere? So what this is saying is we're looking for Coles to Aldi plus Coles to Woolies, because we're trying to figure out what's the percentage that they'll go to the other shops next week. So Coles to Aldi is going to be 15%. And then Coles to Woolies is going to be 5%. Okay, and I'm getting that from here. So Coles to Aldi, 15%. Coles to Woolies, 5%. Okay, so how many is that altogether? 20% of it. So you're going to have to find 15% of the customers. So we'll just go, 20%. Okay, so you have to find 20% now of the 800 shoppers. Okay, so that's going to be 0.2 times 800, which would be 860. Thank you. So 160 shoppers will go elsewhere next week. Okay. All right, and let's do E. If 500 customers shopped at Aldi and 720 shopped at Coles this week, how many of these customers are predicted to shop at Woolies next week? So there's two things we're looking for. Aldi to Woolies and then Coles to Woolies. Those two numbers. Okay? Because that's what it's saying here. 500 were at Aldi and then 720 were at Coles. How many of those customers are going to go to Woolies the week after? So there's two things we're looking for. Aldi to Woolies and then Coles to Woolies. Okay, so this one's, if you got Aldi to Woolies, so A to W is 0.1, which is 10%. And then the other one is Coles to Woolies, so C to W, which is 0.05, which is 5%. Okay, so from there, what we need to find is, looking at that question, if 500 were at Aldi, okay, this week, that means 10% of them, okay, are going to be going to Woolies next week. So we need to find out. Plus, we also need to find 720 customers who are at Coles, okay, 5% of them, okay, are going to be going to Woolies. So we need to find this. So first one, 0.1 times 500. So calculate that. 0.1 times 500 should be 50, yep. And the second one is 0.05 of, let me work that out, 0.05 times the 720. Times 720, which equals 36. Okay, so this number, now we have to add it up. So 50 plus 36 equals 86. So 86 people will shop at Woolies. Okay, so that's how we work out these percentages. They're not that hard. Okay, it's all about understanding how to read that matrix, the transition matrix, figuring out which element you're working with, then you're multiplying that depending on the numbers that have been given to you of where people might move, or it could be, if you look at the questions here, it could be on weather, it could be in people buying, or where birds might move. Okay, so make sure you read the questions properly when you do these.